in my guise as Mistress Agnes, to introduce a lady from the aristocracy. I'm a mere peasant, of course, but it's a very great pleasure I introduce you to MaureenTaylor, who I think is fairly obvious by her attire, but Maureen is acquainted with the good folks of Hardwick Hall, I hear tell. So I have been very deferential, and I will leave her to tell you more about her life and her talking history as she introduces us to the costume of the Elizabethan era.
I'll use it in my hands first and use it when I'm trying to get dressed. I'll use that. Hello, can you hear me, Mother? Okay. Good bidden, kind, gentle and good folk. That's how you would be greeted in the 16th century. Obviously, it's a bit of a mouthful to say if you met somebody in the street, so it'd just be bidden, which is like us saying, "Hey up," "Howdy," "Hiya." So it's a bit slangy, but to a group like this, the way I address you is correct. The title of my talk, although it's been advertised as an Elizabethan extravaganza, I hope you're not expecting me to do anything extravagant, is an Elizabethan wardrobe revealed. And it's a rich woman's wardrobe. If it was a poor or the middling sort, we could perhaps push the middling sort to half an hour, and poor people's wardrobes would last about 10 minutes. So you get your money's worth when you're talking about a rich people's wardrobe. The word wardrobe had two meanings in the 16th century, and it still has two meanings. One is a collection of clothes, and that was the same as in the 16th century. But in the 16th century, it wasn't just a collection of clothes. It was your household linen, wall hangings, tablecloths, towels, bedding. That was your wardrobe. What we know as a wardrobe, which is a cupboard in your bedroom, and you hang your clothes on coat hangers in it, didn't exist till the 19th century. They kept their clothes in chests or coffers or a press. A press is a long, low chest so that an outfit like this could be laid flat in it so it didn't get too creased. It's nothing to do with pressing down. Your clothes would be wrapped in poor quality linen, which stopped it creasing, a little bit like we use tissue paper today, and it would be sprinkled with sweet-smelling powders, in other words, like crumbled up potpourri. And that was to make them smell a bit better, because these outer clothes would never, ever be washed. Only clothes that touched the skin would be washed. There was no dye fixatives, so if you put them in water, all the dye had come out. And material shrank in those days. There was no anti-shrink properties, because a lot of things were wool. So it got rid of the smells, and it also kept moths at bay. And you would need a special room in which to keep these coffers or chests. If you were like the Cavendishers, that's Bess of Hardwick's family, you would have several ornate chests in your bedroom which would keep quite precious items of clothing, but the rest would be put in this room. Another name for a room at this time, besides a chamber, is a ward. It's a space. A ward means a space. We still have that term today in hospitals. It's a big room, a big space. And it was a ward for robes, where you put your robes and all the household linen. Now, Elizabeth I's wardrobe was a huge building between Pudding Wharf and Pudding Lane. I would imagine it was one of the first buildings to go up in flames in the Great Fire of London. But it would have been probably an obsolete building anyway by then. But it was a huge building, and as well as clothes, as I say, all the linen for the palaces, all the wall hangings, spare tapestries would be booked in and booked out, a bit like a library. But it would be an army of male clerks, because women weren't deemed capable enough of doing that sort of job. A lot of women, even upper class women, still couldn't write. They could read, but not write. Now, we know an awful lot about Elizabeth I's wardrobe and other people's. For Elizabeth I's wardrobe in 1600, she got her tailor to make a list of every item of clothing in her wardrobe. Over 3,000 items of clothing, 2,000 of which were robes or dresses. The tailor didn't just list them, he described them, how he'd made things over, because Elizabeth, like our Queen Elizabeth, had things made over. He also wrote how he tried to keep them clean. He used a lot of fuller's earth, a lot of brushing, and how he repaired things. It's a really interesting document. So we know a lot about Elizabeth's clothes. Now, fabric, textiles, you showed your wealth in your homes through textiles and on your back, because every thread has been hand spun. Every piece of fabric has been hand woven. So fabric, textiles are valuable. You did not waste a thing. You recycled and recycled and recycled. It's not a new phenomena. It's something that happened years ago. It's like buildings. You got a castle fall down. What do local inhabitants do? They go and nab the stone to build houses with. But your clothing, because it was valuable, became part of your estate. And to make sure the right person got the right piece of clothing, it would be described in detail in the will. So to make sure Uncle Jack got the black doublet with white embroidery and gold fringing, we get quite a detailed explanation. So it was your clothing was valuable. You didn't waste a thing. Now, for rich people, or not just rich, the nobility, there were laws governing what you could and couldn't wear. And for anybody higher than a knight and his lady, you could wear the most sumptuous fabrics. You could wear the deepest, brightest colours, usually made from mineral dye rather than vegetable dye, which were more expensive. And you could wear the most modern styles. Now, you might be the poorest person in the nobility, but you could wear silks and satins, where a middling sort of person, up until the 19th century, they called them the middling sort. It's middle class, same sort of people. And they were limited. You could get a really rich merchant, but he wasn't allowed to wear silks and satins apart from on the sleeves. Now, if you're reading a historical novel and you're reading about a lawyer's wife wearing a damask gown, she was breaking the law. These laws were called sumptuary laws. They've been around since Roman times. It showed where you stood in society. If you were meeting somebody for the first time, you knew whether they were deemed worthy of speaking to. And this applied to professions. There were 3 professions, and I'm sorry, if you're ex-teachers, it wasn't one of them. That was the church, medicine, and law. And for each of those professions, you wore a special hat, you wore a special gown, and that's carried through a little bit today. I've been to 3 different universities, and in each case, the gown was slightly different, the hat was slightly different, or the board, and the hood was definitely different. So you could tell which university you'd been to. I mean, when I was young, all the teachers in school used to wear the gowns and the hoods. I've got some nods there. But, so it's a similar sort of thing. Rules were written down. Sumptuary laws even applied to how many courses of food you had on your table. James I of England did something sensible in his life. In 1604, he banned the sumptuary laws. Quite egalitarian of him. But the fabrics that you could wear, if I can find my notes, some of the fabrics are recognizable today, like linen, lawn, wool, cotton. Cotton was as expensive as silk because it had to be imported. Flannel. Now today, flannel is, if you've got a flannel shirt on, it's cotton. In those days, it was wool. Worsted. You don't see it very often, but it's a name that's recognised. Velvet, silk, satin, damask, taffeta. But things like Mikado, cypress, shamlet, sarsenet, bay, durance, Kendall, frisado, russet. Those names have disappeared. But if you got somebody perhaps in the 20s, 30s today and asked them, what's crimpline? They wouldn't have a clue. We all thought it was wonderful. You could go on holiday without looking creased. But it held smells. You know, if you got sweaty, you couldn't get rid of it. And with colours, they say the nobility could wear expensive or bright, deep, glowing colours. Now, if you got something like Isabelline, Ventre de Biche, Pimpillo, Lusty Gallant, funny name, Zinzalin, Incarnate, Virili, Insignia Matti, Azzurri. Those are the sort of colours somebody who's a nobleman and his wife would wear. Guess what status you were if you wore horseflesh, peas porridge, clay colour, rat colour, what's another one? My favourite, the second favourite, puke, which was a brown rusty colour. Carrots then weren't orange. And my favourite one of all, goose turd, which was a greeny yellow. Yeah. So, but if in 400 years' time somebody's doing an archaeology search and they come across a Dulux chart or a B&Q paint chart, they give them all, I was looking for paint the other day, and they give them all sorts of weird and wonderful names. I mean, in 400 years' time, they'll be saying what I'm saying. Look at the names that they gave their colours. You know, they'll think it's laid down in the rules, so to speak. But I just think it's quite funny how things disappear. And crimpline has really disappeared really fast. It was really good. You know, you could arrive on holiday and you wouldn't be creased. But hey-ho. We've got other stuff now that doesn't crease. Okay, I'll get round to the clothes you see before you. What I'm wearing is smart cash for a noble woman. Well, I haven't got to scrub floors, have I? And the more awkward your outfit was to wear, the more difficult. It was a statement of wealth. If you couldn't turn quickly, if you couldn't reach, if you couldn't bend, well, you got a servant to do that. It was a statement of wealth. You could afford lots of servants to do the bending and stretching and goodness knows what else. But this is reasonably comfortable. I can bend and stretch in it. It's an outfit that dates from around 1565, not far into Elizabeth's reign, 7 years into it. And it's quite cosmopolitan. The farthingale, the hoops that I've got on, I shall be very daring, gentlemen, and show my underwear, is a Spanish farthingale. The wood should have been between 6 and 12 hoops. After 5, I got fed up. And then I discovered I'd made it too short, so I put a frill on the bottom. But they would have been made of wood. Mine's made out of flexible steel, because I want to be able to go to the loo. Can you imagine if I got wooden hoops on, trying to fit in a toilet and pulling things up and down? That's why they didn't wear any knickers. But the Spanish farthingale, the name came from, they made it from wood, and the Spanish called it verdigado. Verdu for wood, gardo for frame or a guard. The French call them vardingale, and we make it sound dead common and call them farthingales. The first recorded instance of a farthingale is in 1488, when a Spanish infanta was painted wearing one. They may have been around before then. They carried on. They were introduced into England, first of all by Catherine of Aragon, who came over in 1509 to marry, and she married Prince Arthur. And then it was continued by Mary marrying Philip I of Spain. So Spanish fashions became popular, but it's still around. In the 17th century, towards the end of it, they wore panniers, or the beginning of the 18th century. That's going sideways. The only time they didn't wear them is during Jane Austen's time, when they wore the Empire line. Then they went back to them, but they called them crinolines instead. And when my youngest daughter got married, she wore a crinoline underneath the wedding dress. Only trouble was, every time she wanted to go to the loo, me and her sister had to help her, because she got a train as well. But they're still around. It must have been one of the longest running fashion items going, apart from socks. Well, the Egyptians wore socks. Anyway, that's the Spanish side. And the hanging sleeves are also Spanish influence. Spanish bag sleeves. They're very handy if your hands get cold, because you can slot your hands inside. I can't get it out now. The braiding on my outfit, and what we know as frogging, is Polish style. Evidently the Poles liked a lot of braiding. The French influence is on the hat. Now, if you've seen that awful series, The Tudors, where they can't get the facts right even if they tried, or the other Boleyn girl, you see women running around with the hair hanging down and just a crescent-shaped hood on the head. Now, that's a French hood. But this is a married woman's French hood, because once you get married, you're expected, apart from a little bit at the front, to cover your hair up, because you might inflame men's passion. The only time you could have a married woman could have her hair hanging down was if she was being crowned, which didn't happen very often, when she got married, and if she was at the court and she went to a court masque, and that's MASQUE, which is dancing, singing, playlets, and you went in fancy dress. They had a fine old time. A married woman can have her hair down. So that's where the expression, to have fun, you let your hair down, comes from. Oh, I'm full of these little quotes, if you like. So that's the French influence. Low Country influence is the ruff. Now, these were introduced around 1563-64. And it's said that it was the wife of Elizabeth I's coachman who introduced them. Her name was Bingham van der Plas. Evidently there's a load of coach builders called van der Plas. Gentlemen, you might know more about it than me. And she introduced ruffs from the Low Country. Well, we had ruffles on our shirts and ruffles on our shifts, and we starched them up to this point with juice out of cuckoo pint stems, bluebell stems, and daffodil stems. And if it was out of season, you boiled up the roots of cuckoo pint to stiffen your ruff. Obviously, if you got sweaty or it was drizzling, it'd just go, it'd flop. But once this starch had been introduced, made from flour, from the Low Countries, the ruffles on the shirts and shifts got bigger and bigger, and it needed a lot of expertise to make them look like this. So they started to make them separate, and that's how ruffs came about. They started off quite neat and small, and they were worn both by men and women, and gradually they got bigger. They could be 16 to 18 inches deep, that's out here. And they could be at least 5 to 6 inches deep. So you would walk round with your head up all the time, and you wouldn't be able to see your feet. But then again, you're rich. You don't need to see your feet. You've got servants to do anything lower than your neck. So that's how ruffs came about. At the front here, I've got a 4-part. They thought it was a waste of money to have something that was going to be only seen at the front going all the way around. Fabric was valuable. You weren't going to waste it if it wasn't going to be seen. If you were wearing a kirtle, which is from the neck down to the floor, in Middle Ages it was like a shift type outfit, and it didn't change much until the end of Elizabeth's reign. The front, you would wear it underneath an overgown. The front would be seen, so you would have it in a ornate fabric, sumptuous fabric. But the back of it would probably be linen, because nobody ever saw it. Why waste valuable material if nobody's going to see it? They were very thrifty. So this is, and you could mix and match with these 4 parts, as you'll see later on. What I've got on is an overgown or mantle, and it covers a multitude of sins. This is a particular female style, but men wore them as well. It's got practical use. At the time of the Elizabethan period, it was what we know as the mini ice age. People could ride a horse or walk across the Thames. Even had ice fairs on the Thames. The last time that happened was in 1814. It was bitterly cold. So in winter, this would be made from felted wool lined with fur, as would be several other layers as well. You invested in fur a lot. Probably bunny fur, because nobody ever saw it. But it's also, if you become pregnant, that's out of question for me, you would wear a loose gown. And I've got a picture of Bess of Hardwick somewhere here, wearing one. Or I should have. Ugh. I'll put my microphone down a minute. Sod floor, isn't it? Right, you can pass this round. handy having a servant. This is Bess of Hardwick when she's pregnant. She's probably in her mid-20s at that point, but she's got a loose gown on. And her hands, she's got both hands in the portrait. That's a sign that they're rich. Hands were difficult to paint, so artists charge more. So if they've got both hands in the portrait, seriously rich. One hand, middling rich, no hands, forget it. But she's holding a pair of gloves, and there's also a lot of symbolism in Elizabethan portraiture. This isn't obviously in Elizabeth's time. This would be in Edward's time, going into Mary's. But she's holding a pair of gloves over her belly, and that signifies love and loyalty to whatever the gloves are held next to. And there she is holding the gloves over her belly. So she's already saying that she loves that baby. Oh, where was I? Oh, and also, if you're getting on a bit like me, when you're wearing this, nobody knows that I've got rolls of fat. It hides a multitude of sins. It's really handy. And you can't turn round and say to your husband, does my bum look big in this? Up until the First World War, the bottom half of females was always disguised because the shape of the bottom half of a female would inflame too many men's passions. And for God's sake, we don't want to do that, do we? Anyway, the next outfit is this one. Not mead. This is a riding outfit. It's practical. Now, you may think the roadside saddle. They did for short distances, or like when Elizabeth gave the famous speech at Tilbury Docks. She rode side saddle, but it wasn't a side saddle like we know, with a high pommel and a hook. It was sideways on like a pillion seat, feet on like a running board, and you'd have to twist to take the reins. So obviously you can't ride very far like that. So if you were hunting or riding long distances, and it was only the upper echelon who did this, a horse was an expensive commodity. So you probably, if you were the middling sort, probably only had one horse. Two if you were really successful. And a woman would ride pillion. But not many women rode long distances or hunted. You had to be the upper echelons. And they would ride astride. Your hoops wouldn't be wood. They would be plaited rope, called bents of rope. So they were pliable. And it's the only time that a lady would wear underwear as knickers. But they'd come down to your knees and you tuck them into your nether stocks, which are stockings to you and me, to protect your modesty. Once you're on the horse, because the round skirt, you've got what they call a round skirt on, is longer than the underskirt and the forepart, the hem would be tied to the stirrups. So you wouldn't want to fall off. But saddles then were different to ours. They were much like cowboy saddles with a high pommel and a high cantle. So it was, unless the horse rolled, it was very hard to fall off. Now this outfit, I wear this quite a lot, as you do. Very much in the Polish style. She's got braiding front and back. Stay still. It's based on a man's doublet. Oh, shock horror. Because we're supposed to be soft and feminine, not answering back to our husbands and never voicing opinions in public. Yeah. Can you imagine the Bess of Hardwick sticking to those rules? Don't think so. And it was regarded by the more puritanical sections of society as being something quite shocking, that somebody should be wearing something based on men's clothing. It's fastened, obviously, with buttons. Now, buttons wouldn't be ceramic. They hadn't got the firing process, so they would be wood, horn, metal, glass, jewels, knots, knotted cord like these, or as on the black outfit here, they were made a bit like you do pom-poms. You get a washer-shaped piece of wood, cover it with fabric, and then wind thread around it artistically, and do a lot of French knots in the middle. Hey presto, you've got a button. This one is quite trendy. She's got sleeves that are close-fitting and open at the front and held together at intervals with buttons. You could have jewellery if you were doing something posh. And then you'd pull the lining out to make it look a little bit more decorative. To hide where the sleeves are tied in, if you have a mantle, your sleeves would be sewn in. And generally, anything less than a mantle would be tied in. Occasionally they'd be sewn in, but not all the way around. You would have your sleeves tied in. Don't know if you can see. Both for men and women. And this is so you could interchange your sleeves when they got mucky or worn. You can use the fabric for something else. But also, it left the armpits free. So if you get sweaty, it's just going to go into your shift or shirt that's protecting your body from your mucky clothes, or your clothes from your mucky body. They called these ties points. And I did a talk years ago, and there was a Scottish woman in the family, and she said in some parts of Scotland they still call them points. I don't know how true it is, but it's, you know, I love bits of information like that. To hide where they're tied in this case, she's got almost like epaulets, a continuous band. They could have tabs, which they called pickadilles, or a roll, just to hide where the sleeves are tied in. And it's the same arrangement around the waist. To hide where the belt's tied at the front, you have, in this case, she's got pickadilles, tabs. They called it a skirt. So originally, in men's doublets, when doublets came down to the top of the thigh, they called them a skirt. If you got a continuous one, nowadays you would call it a peplum, but they called them skirts. People stank, so you would have your pomander. It would either be filled with perfume cloth or the equivalent of potpourri. Lovely, isn't it? Saying that people stank, but they did. And I'm coming to bathing habits later on. In this case, because she's going to be doing something sporty, a big ruff would get in the way. So she's got a small, neat ruff on. And I think that's it for this one. Oh, she's got a pocket. You don't have pockets that you can shove your hands in. You have, we'd call it a handbag, I suppose, a little bag. But they called it a pocket. And thieves would just snip through with a knife. And that's why they call them cut purses, because they call them cut purses. You've heard of Lucy Lockett losing her pocket. Who found it? Kitty Fisher. I was doing some other research, and I came across some information about that little nursery rhyme that we tell our children. Lucy Lockett and Kitty Fisher were prostitutes. In fact, Kitty Fisher became a court courtesan, and the pocket was the pimp. And I'm thinking, can we tell our children this? Thank you. It's not, I've never had an assistant before. You'll have to call you Debbie McGee. Right. Which is next? This one. Don't worry, gentlemen, I'm doing you last with the men's outfits. The riding outfit was from about 1570, and with variations on a theme, didn't really change much until end of Victoria's reign. Now this is what you would wear in the 1580s if you were doing something posh. You go into a court function. And by this time, the 1580s, Spanish styles had hit a bit of a buffer. French influence was coming in. The reason why they'd reached a bit of a buffer, well, Elizabeth didn't like Philip of Spain for a start. We were busy knocking off their bullion ships as they came back from the Americas, so we weren't very popular with them. We were vying each other in the Americas for land. And then in 1587, we go and chop a Catholic queen's head off. So that's when they sent the Armada over. And I'm hoping everybody knows the story of the Armada, because I'm not going into it here. You'll be here till midnight. So things French came to the fore. Now, French like women with big hips. Supposed to show fertility. How big do you want your hips? This is, remember, this is for posh. This wasn't exaggerated quite as much if you were everyday stuff. That definitely would escape, does my bum look big in this? Padded sleeves came into fashion, another French style. And the hanging sleeves became long and narrow, French style. You've heard of wearing your heart on your sleeves. It's when your beau, lover, whatever, went into the lists to do a bit of jousting, you would wear a favour. And they stuck it on the sleeves. It could be a handkerchief, it could be a scarf, or it could be specially made heart. And you'd stick it on your sleeve. That's where it comes from, it's wearing your heart on your sleeve. Now, how did they get the hips looking like that? Well, I'll show you. I'm going to have to put this down a minute. I'm guaranteed to break something. They would wear a pad round the hips that they called a bum roll. Can you all hear me if I yell? And that was stuffed with leftover rags. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it later on. But if you're wanting to accentuate it even more, if I can find it, so all the dummies have got the layers on. There you can see a pad. It's like dancing, doing a weird dance. I'll show you one later on. It's like Blue Peter. But you'd also have a frame over the top to make your hips look even bigger. Why the hell would you want that to happen? I'm always trying to get rid of mine. Whoops. Now, as I said, the sleeves are getting bigger, they're getting padded. These are held in with points, and at the end of these points are little metal things. And they're called aiglets. That's still around today, that name is. In the shoe industry. You've got it. Yeah, the plastic bit on the end of your shoelace is called an aiglet. But also, if you're military top brass and you're in your dress uniform, you would have a lot of gold rope from your shoulder, a tassel, and a pointy thing hanging from your shoulder. And that's called an aiglet. I found this out because at a posh dinner down south, I was sat next to a brigadier general. I bet he thought I was dead common. I couldn't tell what he was saying, and he couldn't tell what I was saying, because it was "Imedia," and he kept talking about biz. I'm thinking, what's he talking about? It turned out he was talking about bees. But hey-ho. And the eaglets are there to aid threading. And these are disguised with a shoulder roll rather than a shoulder shield. Again, there's plenty of braiding on. Her skirt's twisted around because I've been fiddling with her. Her ruff's getting a little bit bigger. She's got a skirt on to hide where the skirt's fastened. And this is a different sort of mantle. And it's a sort worn by both men and women. It's just loosed at the back, pleated, and she's got to have something quite full to accommodate the bum. And it's worn open. So it's a bit like the sort of gown you would wear on graduation. Right, missus. Now, dresses in one piece, a kirtle, were dying out. You occasionally got them, and this is one. Right from the beginning of the Tudor period, dresses was coming in two halves, a skirt and a bodice. But this is a day kirtle. A kirtle is from shoulder to floor. If you're reading a novel and it reads that they're wearing a kirtle when they mean a skirt, they've got it wrong. A skirt is a half kirtle. But this is all in one, and it's a day kirtle, would have worn at court just for everyday wear in the 1590s. Instead of having a ruff, she's got a ruffle on a partlet. I'll show you a partlet later on. And she's wearing what is known as a rabato, a stand-up collar. It's the forerunner of the whisks and godillas of James's reign. Again, she's got long, narrow sleeves, French style. She has got a bum roll on, again, French style. I've already described how the buttons were made. She's got a pomander pocket, and people say, "What's that?" It's dead Fred. Ah. Now he would come with either a jewelled collar like this, or he'd have a jewelled snout piece, or both. And it's known as a zebellini. That's in Italy. In England, they were known as flea furs. Everybody, from the most richest to the poorest, had fleas. It depended on how many. If you were poor, you were probably alive with fleas. But they thought the fleas would be attracted from here onto there. Henry VIII, he took a zebellini or a flea fur to bed with him, as did Elizabeth. So they were even bothering royalty. When I used to wear this at Hardwick, kids used to come up to me and stroke it. Ah. And then I told them what it was for. Ooh. I got that, believe it or not, from America. I say occasionally I used to wear this at Hardwick, and it's the only time I've been mistaken for a ghost. First thing in the morning when you go on duty, you go in any room, you open the big heavy drapes. And in the long gallery, I always started at the far end and opened the curtains as I walked back. So I was walking along the long gallery It was semi-dark. And I was halfway along, and I heard this scream. And I turned around and said, "What on earth's the matter?" She says, "Oh, thank God for that. I thought it was Bess." But it's quite a nice outfit to wear. It looks quite glamorous on, if you can call Elizabethan stuff glamorous. Now, I shall be putting on an outfit late in a little while that's to do with the last part of Elizabeth's reign. But we'll move on now to the gentleman. Sometimes if I haven't screwed them together properly, she slowly shrinks, but she's not done it today. Okay. I have to arrange him. It's like me with my partner. I have to straighten him up before he goes out. This I made, copied from a couple of portraits of Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, in the early 1580s. It's what you would wear at court for a special occasion. It's difficult to move in. He's wearing a peascod doublet. A peascod is the old name for a pea pod. And the bellies look like pea pods. It's a fashion that came in from the Low Countries. I wish they'd kept it. And sometimes they could be that heavy, they drooped down, and they drooped down so far you couldn't see the cod's piece, which I'll come to in a minute. The word cod is the name for a small bag. So peas cod, it's a bag for small peas. But also, if a man had got a bit of a belly on him, don't use this as an excuse, gentlemen, it showed that you got enough money to spend on a lot of food. Strange. His ruff has got really quite big, not as big as it could be, but it's getting there. And I've laced his sleeves in differently. Instead of having separate points, I've got eyelets going on the actual doublet itself, then eyelets at the top of the sleeve, and had one long cord and wove it in and out. It's still called a point, and his underarm is still free. Let the wind blow free. And he's got his disguise. Now he's wearing padded paned trunk hose. Normally, they would be padded or stuffed with sawdust. You imagine the weight. And if it got wet, even heavier. And if you got a hole, you've got a problem. Houston. But I've stuffed mine with net because I can squish him down in the car. The panes are these strips. You could have them on your sleeves and pulled in at intervals so it looked a little bit like a Chinese lantern on your arms. But these are just decorative. Now, the guy who used to borrow this at Hardwick, 6'2", he really carried it well. But he used to get himself caught up on door handles. Now, your nether stocks, your stockings, would come just above your knee. These trunk hose finished mid-thigh. So you've got a gap. What do? Well, you wear little trouser things at the bottom, and they called them canyons. Not canyons like the Great Canyon. It's got an eye in it. And it's supposed to resemble cannons' mouths. And that bridged the gap. And they would put the nether stocks on, roll the top so they look quite decorative, and then wear a garter under the knee. If you look at Henry VIII's garters, they've got honey soie Kimali pants on. That's the thing for the Knights of the Garter. talked about his doublet, is really fashionable. He's got a cloak underneath his armpit. Really fashionable. You can imagine Sir Walter Raleigh in 1584 whipping it off and putting it across a bit of boggy ground at Greenwich for his queen to walk over. But as well as a cape under their armpit, they had half a jacket. And they called it a mandillion. Well, why half a jacket? Why not a full jacket? Well, I suppose it's okay if you had your arm chopped off. But have any of you watched The Trooping of the Colour? And you see those men on horses galloping along with a gun carriage at the back of them. They've got half a jacket across the chests. So it's carried on, but not under their armpits, across the chest. Really funny outfit. Now, I suppose you're thinking, she's not mentioned something that's pretty obvious. The cod's piece. It's naught to do with fish. I've already said a cod is a small bag, or a big bag. It depends on how much a man wants to brag. And a pess, or a piece, is a flap. Now this would be fastened to the waistband with points. And also, I've forgotten to mention, the doublet would be fastened all the way round with points underneath his peplum or skirt, because they don't have braces. It would be fastened to his trunk hose, because they need something to keep him up. So all you've got to do for the cod's piece is undo the points, and you can go. You can spend a penny. Now, London, like it is today, was a place of great thievery. And if you wanted to keep your money safe while you're out about on the town, you would keep it in your cod's piece. Now, if I was a shopkeeper and somebody got some money out of the cod's piece, I don't know if I'd want to handle it. And if it was rummaging, but when I made that, my partner said, "What are you making now?" And I said, "It's cod's piece, darling." "What's one of those?" "It's where you put your tackle." "You what?" He wouldn't believe me until I showed a picture of Henry VIII. And it's funny that after he had Edward, his legitimate heir, his codspieces seemed to get bigger and bigger. It's as if he's saying, "Look, I'm a man." And there's a picture of our Henry with his codspiece. And they were decorated. In the Elizabethan period, they were getting smaller, and eventually they died out, thank God. In the Middle Ages, they would just be a piece of cloth that didn't leave anything to the imagination. But they're funny fashions, aren't they? Oh, I've talked about the weight of these trunk hose. You'd have difficulty walking. You would also have difficulty sitting, riding, running. So you would only wear them for formal occasions. And at court, you did a lot of standing. Elizabeth was known to be able to stand for 5 hours at a stretch, and you weren't allowed to sit down in her presence. But if you go to Hardwicke Hall and go into the Highgate Chamber, there are some seats and stools, and people think they're bar stools because they're quite high. They're called farthingale chairs, because it means if you've got padded trunk hose on, if you've got farthingales on, you can just rest the edge of your bum against them. And I forgot to mention that padding wasn't known as padding or stuffing. It was known as bombast. This would be bombasted. So it would strut round court, or waddle, whatever, being bombastic. That's where it comes from. Now, for everyday wear, you've got to have something a little bit more practical. And you've got to be able to walk in it, run in it, ride a horse. So you're not going to wear something like that. Now, the young men of today are influenced by pop stars and footballers as to what they wear. At court, the influence on fashion was from, believe it or not, sailors. Well, everybody loves a sailor, don't they? And you've got Frobisher, Gilbert, Drake, Raleigh, all these famous men. They were he-men, they were heroes. But if they're at court on a special court function, they were expected to wear the white lead makeup, or fucus as it was called. But for practicality, people base their clothes on what a sailor would wear. A posh sailor at court. A sailor would wear galligaskins or galleys. They came below the knee and they were baggy. They're comfy. No codpiece, just a fly of sorts. They would wear a full collar because a ruff isn't practical when at sea. They'd wear an unpadded doublet or lightly padded doublet. And they'd wear a leather jerkin. This is a jerkin. And at court, they wore red Cordoban leather doublets because it was the most expensive leather. This is nearest Dunell Mills comes to red Cordoban leather. But it's illustrative. But you could do anything in it. Again, the guy who used to borrow this at Hardwick said it's really comfortable to wear, which it is. But the top and the bottom are still tied with points all the way round. This is worn at court. It's got gold in the fabric. It's trimmed with gold thread, and it's supposed to be red Cordoban leather. Whew. A variation on that. Now, I made this for somebody at Hardwick. It was quite elderly, and he was gay, and he wanted it made of silver. And I says, Colin, you're going to look like a 16th century spaceman. Leave it with me. It'll be subtle, but exciting. So I made him this, and he was thrilled to bits with it. When it became infirm, I bought it back off him. But it's a similar sort of thing. Instead of galligaskins, it's got Venetian slops, or slops. They came to knee level or just above, and they were narrower. Again, you can move easily in it. It's got an unpadded doublet, and his jerkin, and a very lacy full collar. If you could afford lace, you were extremely rich. It was known as white gold. It was extremely expensive. So that's just a variation on the one you've already seen. And his hat that goes with it. This is a coppertane. It's not quite a tall hat, but it's quite fashionable. Right, I'm going to disrobe. Not all the way. Don't get excited. Oh, these are wrist ruffs. These are they did wear wrist ruffs, but they weren't very popular because they got in the way when you were eating. But it's what I practice making ruffs on. They're both slightly different. So if you want to pass those round. Have you got the postcards back at this end yet? Oh, right. I should be glad to get this off. Only trouble is, the outfit I'm putting on is twice the size of this. great having somebody to help. Now, at one time, this did used to fit properly, but I made it 15 years ago. My figure's changed since then. Oh, I'll be glad to get it off. No, yeah.
Where does it go from? Just the black bit? You may be some time.
Talk amongst yourselves. Oh, that's better. Now the forepart, now you can see it in its entirety, would be pinned with ordinary pins. But because they drop out, and I give talks in places where they probably have a crash the following day, I daren't risk leaving a load of pins scattered about. So I do use safety pins. But it's not how it should be. Oh. Hey, I'll have to do that more often if I'm going to get applause. It's handy having outfits with pockets. Now, I'm stood here in my shift. If you're a gentleman, you would wear a shirt. In the early part of this century, you would have a ruffle, and it would be on display. The picture going round of Henry, you would see that he's got his shirt on display and a ruffle round his neck. You would change your shift or shirt on a regular basis. As soon as you got sweaty, clean shirt or shift. It protected your next layer of clothes from your mucky body, your sweaty body. Now, they would wash the face and neck, they would wash the hands and wrists, they'd wash the feet, and I hope to God they wash something in between, but nothing's ever written about that. And then they'd rub the rest of the body down with a linen cloth, because they thought that linen had got deodorizing or cleansing properties. And I gave a talk some years ago to Derby embroiderers, and there was an expert on linen in the room, and she said, yes, it has got deodorizing properties. So they knew a thing or two. You would only have a bath, and this is if you're well-to-do, twice a year. Once in May when it's starting to get warm, and again in November. Several reasons. One is logistics. You've got to get the water from a well, carry it in heavy pails, which were lead, surrounded by palings, tip it into a cauldron and a copper. Do you all know what I mean by a copper? It's not a policeman. Boil the water up, pour it back into the pails, cart it upstairs. Now, if anybody's been to Hardwick, those stairs are killers. The processional stairway. Your arms must be down by your knees. Then they'd pour it into a wooden tub in front of a roaring fire, and the tub would be lined with linen. Why? Splinters. It's wood. And then the process would be reversed to empty it. But that's what you've got servants for. Another reason is in 1348, we saw the Black Death come to our shores, and they thought it was caught from the public baths, which were right by the river. If it's by the Thames, you're getting a wash in the foulest water possible. And it was also the local brothel. They were called stews. And they thought that was where the plague started. So bathing fell out of fashion. Also, the Romans thought that bathing kept you healthy. When the Romans left our shores in about 420 AD, the onset of Christianity started approximately. And they used water in the ceremonies for making the sign of the cross and to bless people and to christen people. And the priests didn't like it that people were using water in a frivolous way as dunking your body in it. The main reason, they thought disease was miasmic. It was carried on the atmosphere and would enter any orifice. Eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin. If you went abroad, not to foreign countries, out and about in the summer months when disease was rife, you either wore a muffler or a vizard. A vizard is a mask that you tied around the top. It's got holes for eyes. You've got to see where you're going. But there'd be no holes for the nose, no holes for the mouth. And to hold the bottom part of the vizard in place, you would sew a button or a bead level with your mouth and hold that button or bead in your mouth to stop it flapping about. And that's where the expression button your lip comes from. But anyway, they thought that would protect them. But if you put your body in warm water, I'm not saying hot because by the time you've got it upstairs it's gone cold, it would open the openings of the skin, which we know as pores, and allow ill humours to enter the body, and you'd fall sick. Now, when I was young, in the 1950s, we only had a bath once a week. If you're youngest or muckiest, you had last at bath water. But right through as a teenager into the 1960s, after I had my once a week bath, I wasn't allowed to go out because I might catch cold. It was the same way of thinking 400 years later. And if I went out with damp air, oh. When my daughters were going out on the town into Sheffield, and my mum and dad used to come up once a fortnight, and I used to go and see them once a fortnight there, I used to say, for God's sake, dry your hair before you go out, because I'm going to get it in the neck from Grandma. But anyway, the shift was a barrier. Oh yeah, and I was just going to say, if you're reading a novel, and it says in the novel, somebody's been in battle, or they've been hunting, and they come back and the wife's arranged a bath for them, forget it. Twice a year, and that's if you're well-to-do. Elizabeth had one once a month, whether she needed it or not. Her father was fond of being clean. But when you think, 100 years after Elizabeth's death, Louis XIV of France, who built Versailles, he built it with bathrooms, but he only had 3 baths in his whole lifetime. And he was a ladies' man, and you think, But I've just thought of something else, and it's gone out to my head as quick as it came in. Oh yes, I said you had your first bath in May, and have you heard the expression, marry in May, rue the day? It's not superstition. If you've had your first bath of the year, and your intended hasn't, you would certainly be ruining it. Right. Oh, I must be posh because I've got lace on my shift. And if all my high neck shifts are in the wash, because I'm a married woman, not supposed to see my throat or chest, I would have to wear something to cover up. So I would wear a partlet, which just comes, you're not wasting money on extra material that goes past your waist, which is a waste because nobody sees it. You're not wasting money on sleeves because nobody sees them, but you can see the top. And you just have it to fill in the gap. Now, ladies, can you remember knitting polo neck jumpers with a bib on in the 1960s? Similar sort of thing. Nobody saw it, but it filled your neck in. If you were a farmer's wife, you'd probably wear a fur partlet on the outside of your clothing to keep your chest and back warm. Okay, I'm going to start getting dressed now. You'd be glad to know. Your first layer, a woman's first layer, would be a narrow petticoat. Because you've got hoops on, and if you bend over, you get the king and I effect. It tilts. So you can see your ankles, and that would never do. So you'd wear a petticoat a bit narrower. I made this a little bit short because it's just some material that was left at my mum's. She never threw anything out, it might come in. And you know, they've said recently, at 33, you start turning into your mother. I'm saying, when my daughter say, you can throw that out, mother, we don't need it. And I say, well, it might come in. I've got a friend called Justin, just in case. Then I put my nether hose on, which would come just above the knee for a woman. I've told you men wore little belts, which I think caused probably Henry VIII's varicose veins and phlebitis. But a woman would wear ribbon several times below the knee. It would twist behind the knee and several times above. But the French, for men, introduced very short trunk hose. They looked like melons. And they were quite indecent. And you would need something close-fitting, not cloth. Cloth hose were the norm. These are cloth hose. You would have a shape for your foot, because if you've got a seam under your foot, it would be pretty uncomfortable. And you'd have, I think this is a horrible word, a gusset to accommodate your ankles, to give them some shape. Socks or stockings have been around since Egyptian times, but Egyptians only wore them up to their ankles. These are cloth, and they cut on the cross, so there's some give in it. And they come just above the knee. In winter, you'd probably wear 2 or 3 pairs, because it was blooming cold. In summer, you'd wear them in linen, just the same, with a shape for your foot, instead of having a seam underneath. But if you've got thin ankles and big feet, you'd have open gussets. I hate it, it's a horrible word, isn't it? So you'd have a little ribbon to tie them up once you've got them on. Very novel. And men would have a line of embroidery from the top of the gusset to almost to the knee at the side, and they were called clocks because they looked like fingers of a clock. But they were a bit baggy, I suppose. They didn't flatter as much. So you got women in cottages knitting away long stockings to cope with these very short melon-shaped trunk hose to come all the way up. And they hadn't got suspenders because rubber hadn't been discovered. So they would have points at the top of the stockings tied to a belt underneath the garments. But there's no give in it. So sitting's difficult. Going upstairs is difficult. So you've got your padded trunk hose on. These things that don't give. But I used to wear knitted hose, and I had some fine ones done. But there's more darns and men's in them than a little. So I asked the lady who knitted using 3 needles to knit me some stockings. And I says, I want them to come over my knee, no problem. And I would like them with 2 colours. I'd like striped. What colours would you like? Black and red. Fine. I didn't tell her which way I wanted the stripes. I wanted them vertical. Instead, I look like Dennis the Menace's mother. And the thing is, she's done them in thick wool, so I can't get my mules on. And the fridge, that's that wool that makes you itch. Anyway. Bum rolls next. This is my bum roll. It's spelt R-O-W-L, and bum is that, backside. It's a Saxon word, evidently, and we still use it. This would be filled with rags, and goose down and feathers would be used for cushions, pillows, quilts, or eiderdowns and things like that. And these rags, as well as calling it bombast, was known, oh, my mind's gone. Oh, isn't it awful when that happens? Senior moment. Oh, I've forgotten what it's called. Sorry. I'll carry on. It'll come to me in a bit. And in this case, I'm putting my bum roll on underneath my farthingale, because my farthingale is different. You might think I'm going to put a mark in. Carbage. It was known as carbage or cabbage in the trade. Carbage, garbage. I can't find where they've used cabbage from. But I gave a talk in Bakewell, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said, my husband's in the clothing industry. And she said that if anything appears on the market made out of material that you see in Marks and Spencer's or Next, it's known as cabbage in the trade today. So it's waste material. I knew it had come to me eventually. You might think I'm going to put a marquee on. And when I made it, it did fit, but it was 15 years ago. And I'm still trying to get rid of this Christmas's weight. It did used to meet. Oh dear. So I'm having to use my points to fasten it. Now this is known as a drum farthingale, because it looks as if I'm stood in the middle of a drum. There's nothing attractive about it. And for the first time, you could see women's feet. Because before, gowns used to come and covered your feet. But with these, like in the picture of Elizabeth, you can see her feet. Am I caught up? All right. Could be worse. Could be better. Now, as well as a drum farthingale, if you wore another bum roll on top of the one you're wearing already, a smaller one, it would tilt the drum part, and it was known as a wheel farthingale. Not attractive at all, but it was difficult to move in. It's not nice, so I'll make it look a little bit better. I'll put my underskirt on. And they did wear a lot of red and black. Black was the most expensive dye, because it was hard to get consistency. Red, and it stood for constancy. Red stood for nobility and power, and it was also expensive. If you were middling sort and you wore red, it was more of a terracotta. Again, this is more material I found at my mum's. I'll shift you. I bet you're thinking, oh, she's going to put a corset on. It's not a corset, it's a pair of bodies. Now I thought, why call it a pair? There's only one. So I did my research, and in the first part of the 16th century, when they started wearing more corseted clothing, it came in two halves. It either fastened back and front or down each side, so you got a pair. But typical English, we have to shorten things, and we just call them bodies. And that's where the name bodice comes from. Right, oh dear. These are stiffened. I've used modern stiffening to stiffen these. Got muddled up. Oh, good grief. But in the 16th century, if you wanted to be comfortable, you'd wear bound bundles of reed, called bents of reed. But generally, it was willow. It's fairly pliable, but not that pliable. And at court, you needed to be like a V-shaped, like that. Not voluptuous, but get in there. If you were big busted, you were flattened, or it all oozed up over the top. Now, if you wanted a posh bodice, it would be stiffened virtually all the way round. This isn't stiffened under the arms. It would be covered with beautiful material and embroidered. And it would be bound. The binding, for some reason, was called lyre. And if it got mucky and worn, all you got to do is to take the top coat off, top cover, and the binding off, instant asthma, and renew it. Obviously, this is for court. Oh. For every day, you wore something a little bit softer, just stiffened occasionally, and up to the bust, bosom. And it's slightly more comfortable. And it would be you would put the stiffening in the tubes. Took a hell of a long time to make. It's like wearing a stab vest. And you imagine if it's a hot day, as I've worn it on hot days, it's not nice. And if you've got fleas, you can't get at them. Right, this forepart, you probably noticed the forepart last time was A-shaped. That's the nature of the skirt. But because this is almost square, it's more like an apron. It would be fastened on with pins. I've used points because, again, I didn't like scattering pins. Every town would have a pin maker. And because I come from near Sheffield, guess where the steel came from? It came from Sheffield, but it wouldn't be stainless steel. That wasn't invented till several centuries after. They would have to grease them quite regularly. But you lost a lot of your pins, so a woman would ask her husband for more. Now, you would pin your four. Work on it a bit. Pin your four. Pin a. That's where it comes from. Oh, and it's interchangeable. If I decided to take the blue sleeves and the blue floor part out of that, I could wear it with cue for a song. Green sleeves, I heard somebody whisper. These are narrow at the bottom and padded at the top. They didn't wear a uniform. And you would wear it with a green fall. So they were interchangeable. Oh, yeah. I wouldn't be drinking this in the 16th century. It wasn't healthy. While I can still move my arms, I shall talk about hats. Now, the sumptuary laws were intermittently enforced. Henry VIII enforced them, and so did Elizabeth. And Elizabeth brought in even more laws called statutes of apparel. And in 1574, she brought an act in that was nicknamed the Capper's Act. If you were less than a lord and his lady, you had on Sundays to wear a woolen cap or coif. And it had got to be English wool. This protected the English wool trade, and there was a tax on it, so Elizabeth got the tax. So men wore the tall hats, the flat hats, out of English wool. A woman would wear a white woolen coif. And the whitest, purest wool, and this goes down well in Sheffield and Barnsley, was known as Penistone wool. And even today, there's a rare breed of sheep called Penistone Whiteface, and the wool is very soft. How did they get it so white, though? They'd have to bleach it. What did they bleach it with? Urine. Men's urine, because it's not as acidic. Because women's is too acidic, because we're hormonal. And it would stand for a day or two, but nobody could equal the whiteness of Penistone wool. So what the Penistone men got down the necks must have been pretty good ale. Now, while I've got this on, if you're poorly, nowadays, you put a cold compress on your forehead. They believed that keeping your forehead warm made you feel better. So you'd have a forehead cloth. Like that. I feel like a blooming bird. And if I wore it with a heart-shaped bonnet, or I'd keep my coif on, and I could wear it with a coppertain. Similar to that one. Men and women wore these. Or I could wear it with a flat hat. Now, the first smallest flat hat was called a pippin. Men wore it at a jaunty angle. Women wore it plonked on. Or you could wear a flat hat. Now, these are very similar to the ones worn in the garter ceremony. And if you get a doctorate from university, you wear something like this. At the end of the 16th century into the 17th century, you've got something like that. Now, the hat that I wear with the riding outfit is this one. It's a tall hat, again frowned on. And this is what I wear with this outfit. If you see me in the blurb, I've got this on and that on. I think that's quite fetching. But if I was wearing the black outfit, this is what I would wear. An affetet. You could wear it with your hair rolled each side, so you could see a bit of hair, a bit like a victory roll. When my hair was longer, I used to do it like that. You could wear a coif, or you could wear a wig. I normally wear a wig these days. And the veil is plain, that denotes that I'm a widow. And these are the sort of hats worn by Mary, Queen of Scots, and our Bessie. I call her our Bessie because she's at Hardwick, and I worked there for 11 years. And this is an affetet. So it looks quite fetching with the black outfit. So I'm not going to wear any of those. Just like the Queen. I wear a wig. Solves the problem of being a married woman and not showing my own hair. And at the back there's a net, and they would call it a crippin. In the Middle Ages they called it a crispinet. Skirt, overskirt. It's a good job I'm not catching a bus, isn't it? Well, I won't be able to get on. It was really weird. I used to do weekends at Elizabethan New Build near Peterborough. And they've only got one toilet on the property. So there's Queen Elizabeth in the queue. We're in this. And it was a cold day, so I put tights on. I could get them down, but it was very difficult to get them back up again. And I couldn't ask for any help. This is an overskirt. And it's got a waist ruff. You could have them attached, like this one. Or you could have them separate, so you can mix and match. Or you could have your skirt made 2 foot longer, have a tight belt round the middle, and flounce it over. I don't know if I've got a picture showing one. Don't think I have. Is that one with Arbella? Oh, Arbella's is like that. That's one of Bessa's granddaughters. But can you imagine if you stepped on it going upstairs? It'd all come unravelled. I often wonder that about saris. If you stepped on a hem in saris, does it all disintegrate? So I feel like Joyce Grenfell, stately as a galleon. I am old enough to remember her. Right, we're getting there. Now I'm going to wear my jewelled girdle. A girdle means a belt, not something that you wore in 1950s that gripped your fingers. It's got my pomander on. It once broke in the middle of a talk, this did. Highly embarrassing. And it's got a jewel at the end. Now, people carried mirrors around with them. A man would have it amongst his garments somewhere. But a woman would have a mirror on the back of her jewel. It'd probably be highly polished pewter or silver. Glass has a tendency to break. Right, now, I'm going to need help. I know what you're laughing at. I'm showing my ankles. It's like a pantomime dame's outfit, this. I have to do it like this so it falls off the hanger. It's heavy, isn't it? Now this is where I start to use the... Oh, I've not got my arm round. And there we are. The sleeves aren't just padded, they've got hoops in as well. If you look at pictures of Henry VIII, it's very square. I've got ravelled up somehow. Towards the end of her reign, Elizabeth's aged, a virgin. What does she represent herself as? Somebody other. Like her father, she looks square-shaped. Right. Now the sleeves, I bought the material and it had already got leaves embroidered on it. So I thought, how do I make it look Elizabethan? I know. I'll put red beads on so they look like rubies. And they also look like cherries. Now in Elizabethan times, there's an awful lot of symbolism in portraiture, architecture, and clothing. So what do cherries represent? Well, they represent the Annunciation, conception of Christ, which is celebrated by Catholics, not in the Protestant church. Oh dear. That's not a very good situation. But as you will see, it's answerable. But cherries are the first English fruit, tree fruit of the season. And you've heard of the expression, losing your... Yeah, some people have to actually say it, but yeah. Well, it speaks of the first flush of passionate love. So I'm going to go around saying, I'm ready for a bit of passionate love. No, I don't think so. If I go blue, somebody will have to undo me. There's no getting dressed in 5 minutes, is there? Oh. Now it looks a bit messy. You've got to have something to hide it. So they'd have what they called a stomacher or a placard. And this is my placard or stomacher. Don't know if you can hold it up to the light. You can see a piece of wood down the middle called a busk. Means you can't bend. The point is known as the point of honour. It's level. Now I've got around this enunciation business quite craftily. I've just said cherries represent the first flush of passionate love, but also, I'm stuck. Butterflies represent the intransience of passionate love. So I've got crystal butterflies on the front of my placard. They're really cake decorations. But if you're hot, think about what I feel like. Yes, and it would be pinned. But I stabbed myself that many times that I gave up and did it with points. Now, some years ago, just south of Derby, I gave a talk to a WI. It was this talk. And a woman put her hand up and said, I've done a stomacher for my City and Guilds embroidery. And I made the appropriate noises, as you do. And then a couple of years later, I went to the same club, and this woman approached me. I was doing a different talk, and she got out of a carrier bag a stomacher. It was beautiful. And she says, you can have it, as long as you show it people. I says, are you sure? She says, it's shut in a drawer. I have no one to leave it to. And, oh dear. Here it is. I've put the points on. I've only worn it once. I was frightened to death of spoiling it. If you want to pass that around. So I'm doing as I'm told. But as I said, I gave a talk to Derbyshire embroiderers. And as well as the expert in linen in the audience, I told this story. And the woman put her hand up. And she says, I'm that woman. So I says, well, at least you know I'm doing as I'm told for once. Because my partner would dispute that. He thinks I'm contrary. I mean, what name ought to have been Mary. I've lost all my ribbon. It's absolutely beautiful, that stomacher. I'm nearly there. believe it or not. And I'm that hot, it's making my nose run. Oh. I need your help again. This is going to be shoved down my back. This is a support ass or underpropper, and it's to support my ruff. So you need to put it down inside my bodice. I feel like a meerkat after this. Yeah, I think so. I better put my jewellery on. Elizabeth liked her pearls, and after Elizabeth, Bess did. When Robert Dudley died in 1588, Lettice Knollys should have had his pearls as his wife, but Elizabeth had them, and she wore them for the rest of her life. Right. Roll. This is where I do use pins. Oh, I cut my fingernails and I can't. Right, I described the ruffs earlier on and how big they got. Now, technically, I've been married, so I should be wearing something to cover my throat up. So if I got an open ruff, I would have to wear a smaller ruff inside or a partlet. Oh, that's nice. Now, this wouldn't be just to keep cool with. If you were rich in Elizabethan times, you could afford sugar. Unfortunately, Colgates and McLean's hadn't been invented. So if you were rich and could eat a lot of sugar, and believe you me, they put it in just about everything, including fish potage, which is revolting, they had black, rotten teeth. If you're aspiring to be rich, you would paint your teeth black. Now, Elizabeth had got wooden teeth. She'd lost nearly all her teeth. At 25, when she came to the throne, her teeth were already brown. 45 years later, almost, her teeth were missing or black. To pad her cheeks out, she put cloth in her cheeks and wear wooden teeth. What a sight. And obviously her breath would stink, so she would waft it away. But on the inside of her fans, and if you notice in her portraits, virtually everyone she's carrying a fan, would be a little pocket filled with the equivalent of potpourri to disguise the stench. And Elizabeth complained about the French ambassador's breath. I can only assume he'd been eating garlic. Now, Elizabeth, a successful monarch, thanks to the Cecils, but she was a mere woman. When women, the only profession they could have was that of a midwife. They weren't deemed even worthy of having the date of birth recorded, unless they were royal. But Elizabeth was successful. She was known throughout the known world. She used to correspond with a sultana somewhere in the Middle East, not a sultana that you eat, and who's also been reigning a long time, but she was known throughout Europe. And the French didn't like her, the Spanish didn't like her, because she was Protestant and a woman. But she was successful. If you were a traveller, you wanted to go to London. Dirty, smelly old London, the most cultural place in the known world then. She's got more theatres than any other city in Europe. And that's still the case to this day. And you wanted to see the Queen. Well, a court moved regularly. But you imagine the court is at the Palace of Westminster. It's 1,000 years old with a huge hammer beam ceiling, about 150 yards long, with a flight of stairs at one end with a landing. You imagine Elizabeth on this landing, dripping with jewels, wearing white for purity, pearls for chastity, gold for purity, red for nobility and power, black for constancy, white face with white fucus. In front of her are ladies sat on the steps, wearing black and white, again dripping with jewels. The rest of the court, in their sumptuous colours, dripping with jewels and smelling of frangipani, musk, rose, geranium, jasmine, and BO. Men had been known to drop to the knees and crawl the whole length of the court to kiss a hem. Some men fainted, well, with a face like that. But some men wrote poetry. Sir Walter Raleigh likened her in a poem to Cynthia, goddess of the moon. His friend, Edmund Spenser, wrote a poem called The Fairy Queen. Yes, is the most sycophantic person I have ever come across, if you've read any of his work. But she was known towards the end of her reign by one name. Our Queen has been on the throne longer than any other monarch in England. But until her Jubilee, she hasn't been referred to by this name, but it was mentioned at the Jubilee. And that name, that echoes down the centuries, is Gloriana. Thank you very much.
Well, I think in 40 years of Guild conferences, that's the first time we've had a striptease on the stage. That was an absolutely amazing way to start our weekend, and I'd like to thank Maureen very much indeed for informing us, for entertaining us, and for, as I say, getting our conference off to an amazing start. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I can't bend down to show you, but if you're interested, I've got some leaflets of my other talks on the stage at the front, but I can't bend down. I might fall over and I'd be like a turtle.
Right,
anyone any questions?
Does anyone want to ask any questions, or have you stunned? Oh, hang on, there's a roving mic. Wait a minute. We can't have both mics on at once, so we'll... Well, I don't know. Let's try it. See what happens. It won't work.
1, 2. Have you... It's on. It is on. Wait. Right.
No.
lifting and swinging round. And well, the bus here, so you wouldn't grab hold of your queen just there. Yeah, she was held round the waist. Mind you, this is only balsa wood. It's probably a harder piece of wood, and if you held it, you could shove her up. I thought you were going to talk about music, because when I did my postgraduate diploma in European Humanities, which was a fantastic course, I specialised in the Renaissance in England, and it covered art, architecture, history, literature, music. I tended to avoid it because I am the least musical person you will ever come across. I like rock and roll music, and my head will go like that, and that's about it.
I have a question of you.
I live quite near Little Morton Hall, where they do dress up, but I've noticed that they, particularly in the cooler months, they tend to wear a lot of quilted petticoats. Do you have quilted ones?
The one I just took off
Oh.
is,
And that was just for warmth?
yes, yeah. In summer months, you'd probably wear lighter clothes like linen a lot, and if you were rich, it'd be very fine linen. Cotton, if you're very rich, as I said earlier, it was expensive as silk because it was imported. Obviously, if you were rich, silk, but you would stay indoors. If you were well-to-do, you would stay indoors, because if your complexion got rosy or brown, it suggested that you were base-born. You worked on the land. So you'd stay indoors where it was cool. That's why they've got the long yellow. Yeah. Can you imagine wearing this in that gallery at Little Morton Hall? You'd roll down one side.
I'm really sorry. I'm getting signals that we're running to beyond our time. If you've got more questions for Maureen, I don't know whether she's able to kind of answer why she's taking her clothes off or something. But can we just give Maureen another round of applause before she packs up? Thank you.